Okay, so tour of the brain. You guys will coach me if I've missed anything. So we have the cerebral hemispheres. This is your kind of thinking parts of your brain. There is the longitudinal fissure, is the split that separates the right and the left halves of the brain. This is where the hit, or this is the most rostral, this is the most caudal. This would be the cerebellum. Cerebellum's job is to moderate movement, not to generate or not to instigate movement. It's instigated up here, but the cerebellum controls the rate, range, and force of movement so that you gently do movements that require gentleness. You're not slamming around. And I told the students, remember, this is kind of like that cat video where we saw the cat can walk just fine, but he's really uncoordinated, and he's got almost this hyperactive gait that's not this cool, smooth cat gait. So that's a problem with the cerebellum when it's not functioning. The ridges on top are called gyri, is plural. Gyrus is a singular. The ditches in between, or these valleys, are called sulci for plural. Sulcus is an individual one. So all of these are sulci. This longitudinal fissure is the most dramatic because it really separates the right and the left. But there is this one right here. It's a little less distinct, but they call this the transverse or horizontal fissure, either name, transverse or horizontal. When we flip over, this is the ventral aspect of the brain. You have these bulbs right here are called the olfactory bulbs. Olfactory, they're designed for sense of smell input. This X-like structure is made up of the two optic nerves. This is the right optic nerve. This is the left, because we're coming in from underneath the brain now. So this is from the left. This is from the right eye. These connect to the back of the eyeball. But the input, or the information that your brain gets from your right eye, crosses over and goes to your left side of your brain, and vice versa, it goes this way. So this junction is called the optic chiasm, C-H-I-A-S-M, for chi, C-H-I, the Greek letter for X. So that. This is where the pituitary used to be. We'll see the pituitary, it kind of comes ripped off unless the brain is sectioned in half, but we see it on our cross-section brain here in a minute. This section right here is called the pons. The pons controls things like breathing and things. Part of the brain stem. The brain stem is a three-part thing. It's the pons, the midbrain, and the medulla oblongata. Okay, we'll show this on the cut view too. Okay, what am I missing, guys? That may be. We got to do. Well, we're going to do that on the video, but on the cross section. Okay, so moving over to. So this is a brain that's been cut in half down the longitudinal fissure. This stuff up here is part of something called the ethmoid plate, part of the skull. And they leave it on because it really holds on to this dura, the meninges, which is this membrane. We'll come back to that. So here's that olfactory bulb that you can see on the underside of the brain. It's just one side. In here you have the longitudinal fissure has been split. This section right here is the corpus callosum. If it were not sectioned in half, this actually comes across to the other side of the brain and communicates the right half of the brain with the left half of the brain, can talk to each other. This corpus callosum is made of white matter, meaning it's myelinated. It has the myelin sheath on it. Most of this brain in the cerebral cortex is not myelinated. It's why it gets called gray matter. Myelin is what gives it the whiter color that calls it white matter. So this is corpus callosum. It crosses over from the right brain to the left brain. This pocket in here is actually a small cavity in the brain. They call the ventricles, and there's actually cerebral spinal fluid flows in and out of the ventricles in a normal animal. If flow of that gets occluded, or if fluid starts to build up in there, it actually can cause swelling of that chamber, and that chamber fills up with fluid too much, and it squishes the gray matter of the brain up against the skull. They call it hydrocephalus, which is literally transmitted water brain. So fluid in the brain. So all of this is cerebral cortex, all this stuff. When you get into this part, you've got the diencephalon part in here. Is this part, sorry. Diencephalon. And then this part's the brainstem. The diencephalon, and this corresponds to a slide in your lecture that talks about this, and I don't know if you guys want to swing it. Oh, I moved it, never mind. So the diencephalon, even though the letters di, we think of as di meaning two, it really has three parts to it. Two of those parts are true brain parts, but the pituitary gland is this part. The pituitary gland is thrown in there because it has some nervous tissue in it, but it is part of the endocrine system too. So that's pituitary. The other two parts are the hypothalamus, which is in here, and then it's very hard to determine on these models, but there's a little round area called the thalamus in here that is about there. So hypothalamus and thalamus, pituitary gland. Just to orient you, this little stump right here, that's part of that optic chiasm where the two optic nerves come together. And it's just cut in half there. So all of this is diencephalon. You get into this section, this is all the brainstem. You have the midbrain that kind of comes down like this. It's not very easy to tell really where it stops, but this is the midbrain. This part is the pons, which you see as this ridge underneath, right? Oops, if I reflect back that, see that's the pons area, and it correlates to that. And then this would be the medulla oblongata, this bottom part. This is the cross section splitting down the middle of the cerebellum. And the cerebellum, like I said, covers the rate, range, and force of your movements. It doesn't initiate the movement, but it coordinates it. Within the cerebellum, you have this branch-like structures that are lighter in color. They're lighter in color because they are myelinated, and they call this the arbor vitae, a arbor-like tree, arboretum. Vitae, I think, is vital, means something like that, or life. So tree of life, essentially, is the translation. The rest of the tissue that's not part of this arbor vitae is gray matter. So in between the branches of the trees, this is all gray matter, non-myelinated, but this arbor vitae itself is myelinated. This whole brain is covered with the meninges, which is this membrane. It's not on this other brain. This brain has had it removed. This has not. The outermost layer is the dura mater. So there's three layers to the meninges. The outermost one is the dura. Then, I actually was seeing it here pretty well. Let's see if I can find that again. So if we look at this meninges here, you can see this is dura. There's a space in between that's been torn away here a little bit, that's spider web, that's the arachnoid. And then this layer here that's right up against the brainstem, that's the pia mater. So up here, let's see if I can find it again. It's kind of hard to see, but was this the specimen I used for? This wasn't the specimen I used for this, right? This is pretty good, actually. I mean,
I thought that was the one.
Is this the same one? Yeah. So you have, this is dura. This thin layer here is pia. The arachnoid's been disrupted quite a bit here, but it would be in this space. It's a very fine, delicate, spiderwebby layer, mesh layer. I guess you kind of see it as the thicker outer layer here. I guess this is probably arachnoid here. This, you can see a little bit of the porous nature of it in here. And then the very innermost layer is the pia. So arachnoid's very easy to disrupt because it's very delicate. But you can see the pia right here is, I'm kind of plucking at that fold. That's a bit of a fold of the pia mater. So when we say an animal has meningitis, we mean this stuff is inflamed, the meninges. If we say they have encephalitis, we mean the brain is inflamed. If they have meningoencephalitis, that means both the meninges and the brain are inflamed or infected, as the case may be. Okay? So, cerebral cortex, corpus callosum, and again, I'm upside down, maybe I should turn it over. So, cerebral cortex, corpus callosum, diencephalon, of which the three parts are the thalamus, hypothalamus, and pituitary gland. You have the brain stem is this part. You have the midbrain that runs down here. You have the pons is the kind of bulge on the bottom. And then you have the medulla oblongata. This is the cerebellum, the arbor vitae, with the gray matter in between. The arbor vitae itself is white matter. Good? Did I think we covered it? Okay.
Thanks.
Yep. I would share that with everybody.